Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialize in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Hello and welcome to episode 367 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. I'm Rory and my guest today is Andrew Kidd, a BACP Senior Accredited Counsellor, EMDR Europe Accredited Practitioner and author, who we first met in episode 356, where we explored the structural model of EMDR, also known as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. In this second of a two-part conversation, Andrew explores with us the functional application of the approach, how EMDR is actually applied in the therapy room. So with that said, let's roll the intro.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for counsellors, psychotherapists, and counselling students. Here are your hosts, Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 367 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with Rory Oakes and Ken Kelly. And today Rory and I are going to be taking you on a journey through three different destinations. The first one stopping at ethical, sustainable practice, where we're going to be speaking about something that is very current at the moment, and it is talking to clients about AI. We then go into practice matters. As Rory has beautifully introduced, we have Andrew Kidd, EMDR explained, and this is part 2 of that series. And then we go into student services, where today we're delving into the world of when you actually become qualified as a counsellor. What does that look like and does that mean? But starting off, Rory, something that I think is very timeless and important for us to be discussing, and it's talking to clients about AI.
Yeah, absolutely, Ken. And, what we're talking about here is self-help. So, throughout my life, and certainly as a therapist, self-help has been something that people have gone to and they've had difficulties in their lives. So it used to be radio stations where people would phone in for an agony aunt or uncle. It used to be called agony aunts. And then it was newspaper columns. And then, as the 80s came, people would buy books. Certainly when I came to train as a therapist, there was a huge self-help boom in self-help books. I can't think of how many times I heard, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway by Susan Jeffers was mentioned by clients. Very famous book in the 2000s. And then as we moved on and technology started to step into our life more and more, we found people going to Facebook groups or social media groups to try and talk about what was going on for them. And, as a therapist, all these things are fine because they tended to be non-transactional. Reading a book, you're reading a book or listening to a radio show or magazine, a self-help magazine. Even if you're on a Facebook page, or a social media page, you're just reading what people have written. They may make a video, that type of thing. But the world of AI has changed self-help to a point where therapists really need, I think, to contract with clients about the risks of AI. And we know that more and more people are going to AI and using them to talk about their issues, their problems, to try and find solutions in life. And what we have to forget, don't forget, is that AI is machine learning. It's a computer. It's a robot for all intents and purposes, and they are flawed. And I'm sure you could talk a lot about the type of really scary things that's happened when people have engaged with AI for therapy. And it's ended up where people have took their lives. It's aided people taking their lives or making really bad decisions.
Yeah.
What we have to do as a therapist, I think, is be aware of that and maybe just build in that into our contracts. What's your thoughts, Ken?
Well, I think that we need to kind of set the scene on this by asking a question. And I'd like you, as the listener, to answer this question. Your client comes in and they say to you, after the last session that we had, I jumped onto AI, and I'm just going to use ChatGPT as an example here, but there are a number of different models, and talking LLMs here. I jumped onto ChatGPT and I kind of ran what we discussed into ChatGPT, but it suggested X, Y, and Z. And I was wondering how that is for you. So that's your client saying that to you as a counsellor. And I'm going to leave you with that thought of how you might react or answer that. And then I'm going to share with you some recent data. Now, the numbers vary depending on where you look. But the data suggests that 70 to 80% of people that have an LLM, ChatGPT or Claude or equivalent, have used it to ask therapy-related questions about their own well-being. So, and the next thing I guess is when I brought this topic up in our Facebook group, and asked that very same question you've just been asked, so many were weighing in saying, this has actually already happened to me. And I think we need to think very carefully about how we have that conversation, because it is something that just a year ago would be very unlikely for us to come up in therapy, but now it is exceptionally likely that a client might turn to an app like ChatGPT and ask their questions. And when we're looking at this, we're speaking very much about LLMs. We're speaking about off-the-shelf models here. We're not talking about purpose-built apps, and there are hundreds of those and more coming our way, and that may have some kind of an oversight or have some kind of very critical thinking into how they're being built, where they've been purposely built as a companion or to bridge a gap between therapy sessions. We're not talking about that at the moment. We are speaking specifically about off-the-shelf models. And I think for us to be able to have this conversation, we as counsellors and psychotherapists need to be open to learning about what these LLMs are, how they work, what the pros and cons of those are, so that we can inform our clients. And we'll get more into that in a moment. But as you've mentioned, Rory, and I challenge you as the listener, just jump online and look at do a search, and you will find recent court cases where horrific instances have played out, where people have gone to ChatGPT, used it for assisted suicide, or have got themselves into a lot of trouble using an LLM. And what is happening slowly is that some of the companies that make these are starting to put guardrails in place to kind of limit how much information it may give or how it may interact in those therapeutic conversations when it recognizes that it has a therapeutic nature. But those guardrails are pretty flimsy at the moment, and they're being put in place not because they care about the mental health of the world, and maybe they do care about the mental health of the world, but they care more about not getting into court cases and being sued for millions of dollars. And that's why those guardrails are being placed on. So I think that just kind of sets the scene, Rory, of what it looks like at the moment. And I know that it can be tempting as a counsellor to go AI AI in therapy, those words should never be mentioned together. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to see it. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to speak about it. And there are practitioners that are taking that kind of road for this. And I think that we're not best serving our clients by doing that. Whether you choose to use AI or not, I think it's something that we are called upon to learn and study and understand so that we can guide our clients. And we may say, well, I'm not using AI. It doesn't come into my practice, but it may very well come into your practice via means of a client, as you mentioned, Rory, coming in and having that conversation with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've said on a number of occasions, clients will go externally to look for answers along with their therapy. You know, whether it's self-help books or joining something or listening to a radio station. More recently, it's been things like podcasts, Netflix, movies, a lot of movies about mental health now, a lot of discussions in the media about mental health. And certainly all those come into the therapy room. I'm sure there's lots of you listening who think, well, that's happened to me. Only this week, a client was watching a film and they said, you know, this is the type of thing that's going on in my life at the moment, or I read a book, or I'm trying to help myself. But you're absolutely right. And I wonder, Ken, you know, therapists, we taught therapists for a long time, still do it to a great extent. And we always teach, be curious. What are our thoughts, I wonder, about a client who comes in and says, I had a long discussion with ChatGPT or whatever large language model. That's what an LLM is. It's a large language model, machine learning, AI, better known as AI. And they told me that this would be the best course of action, and that would be the best course of action. Because what we mustn't forget is this isn't text-based. A lot of these large language models have voice, so you can literally have a conversation with an AI, and they sound plausible, they sound interested, they sound attentive, they're always affirming. That's a great idea. Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. You know, they're consistently trying to suck you in to use them. What do we do when a client comes in, sits in front of us and says, I had a long discussion with AI last night, and they said that this is what I should be doing. Do we as therapists become curious and say, okay, what did AI say? Or do we just gently remind the client that AI is actually a computer machine and try and inject a bit of reality into the situation? What are your thoughts on that, Ken?
Yeah. They are mixed. So it's early days at the moment, and I look forward to when we can look to our ethical bodies, specifically here in the United Kingdom, for formal guidance on this. But I might suggest that the conversation around AI or LLMs or the models that might be used by our clients is had right at the beginning of our sessions together in contracting. And if I was in practice right now and I had a number of clients, I might be adding something to my contract now, and I might be bringing that up even if it's mid a series of sessions, saying I've just added this onto my contract. Any contract, a clinical contract, should have a final line on that says, you know, that this contract is open to review from time to time, and this is a time to review it. You know, come and put in new information on that. And I would have the conversation up front with the client around AI, what the pros of AI are and what the cons of AI are. And you've spoken about some of the pros there, Rory, and we can't say there aren't any pros. AI is incredible. You know, go and try it out yourself and you'll see, you can go, wow, that is really, really incredible. And it can come up and it's very plausible. There are times you can ask it questions and it will come back and it will have incredible answers. And those answers are mostly right. However, we look a little bit deeper under the hood of what it is. And the way a large language model works is it's basically a massive prediction tool in that it looks at what words are being used and then it predicts what are the most the words that would most probably fit, and it puts that in and gives an output. So it is not thinking, it is not contemplating. There are times that it will dip into some of the research that it has to give that answer, but it is not a thinking model. And yes, it's available 24/7. That's an incredible pro on that. It seems empathic. However, it is not. It is just a computer-generated voice, as you mentioned, Rory. But that, if you interact with it, that can sometimes be a little bit hard to determine. I know myself. I interact with a large language model, and I can have conversations and feel that I've really had a great conversation and come out with some really good critical thinking ideas that I might expand on. Where the danger lies is in when it is a person's clinical journey and care. So I would be putting a contract together that stated what the cons are, and I would be contracting around the client's use of AI before they came and had that conversation. And then if they did come in and mention that they'd be using AI, I have to welcome that conversation into the room. I have to. I can't shut it down and say, oh, that's AI. I don't want to look at that, because you're not allowing part of the client that they want to bring in. So I am going to explore that with them, but I'm going to explore it with them within the boundaries of the pros and cons and the revisiting of the contract. And mostly, if you think about why we're doing this, is we're doing it out of protection. Number one, protection for the client. And as I said, go look up news articles on AI, mental health disasters, and you'll see there are plenty. So we're trying to save our clients from that. We're at the same time looking after ourselves and our practice and how that might look if a complaint was made. And I'm going to use an example. A client comes in, says they're using AI. We go, oh, that's very interesting. Tell me all about that. What does that mean to you? That's great. Okay, moving on. And when we speak about something different and we haven't outlined those dangers around AI, how does that look if something goes wrong for that client and this ends up at your ethical body as a formal complaint? How do you defend the fact that the client brought that they were using AI into your session and that you didn't give them any information on how that could be detrimental to them, that you just said, okay, that's fine, and moved on? And I think that would be very difficult to defend. In fact, I don't think you can defend that. And I don't think that it is that duty of care that we offer towards our clients. And we'll get on to in a moment what we might put into our contract and what that wording might look like. But I just wanted to touch on some of the areas of why an LLM can be dangerous, really, when used in a mental health setting. And the first one is that I would imagine that every client you see, the very first thing you do is some form of a triage or an assessment. You're going to understand who that client is, what their history is, what medications they're on, what treatment they have had before, how that worked out for them, what their goals of therapy are. So we do a lot of work before we even say to the client, well, now tell me what it is that you want to bring into the session. Whereas AI does not. It takes what they've said in that moment and gives an answer. And that does not reflect the journey of this person, their past behavior, their clinical history. None of that is taken into consideration. We also need to recognize some of the shortfalls of using an LLM or AI. And these are easily found in doing some CPD on AI. And one of the things that you're going to find is that AI doesn't always tell the truth. So it can generate responses that sound really confident. It uses very authoritative language as it's saying that, but they may be inaccurate, it may be misleading, it can be incomplete, or it may be wholly inappropriate at that moment. One other thing I'll touch on, and there's a number of these points, but we'll bounce them between Rory and myself, is that AI is by its very nature the LLM models are by their very nature sycophantic. And what I mean by sycophantic is it loves to tell you how right you are, how clever you are, how you've really hit the nail on the head there. It's like, I think of it as like a little puppy. It's like a little puppy dog. It always wants to wag its tail. It wants to serve you and it wants to do its absolute best for you, no matter what. And that is not always serving it's not serving in a therapeutic environment. And if you've used AI, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. AI gives you an answer out and you go, no, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking. I was thinking this, that, and the next thing it'll come back and say, you know what, Ken, you're 100% right. You've really nailed it here. Well, let's rewrite this in the way that you want that to be. So sycophantic behavior is not serving. Rory, some thoughts from your side?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, you rightly said, is that therapists are going to have to engage with AI. And the reason for that is it's going to be used legitimately in the medical profession. Here in the UK, we have the National Health Service, and they're already using AI in the National Health Service. So the ability to be able to distinguish between an ethical large language model, one that's used in a clinical setting, and an AI that is just something you download from the App Store, I think is pretty essential that you understand. And also, we're going to be engaging with it more and more, because it may be that we get referrals where someone has engaged with an AI model and they've done an initial assessment, or they've had some brief therapy with AI. And I'm thinking about the model called a cognitive behavioral model that helps people with their thinking. That's been around for years. When I worked in a charity, they had computer banks with this. It's called Beating the Blues, I think. So these first line, if you like, interventions are going to be more and more about AI and how AI is implemented, and data collection. I think one of the things that we all have to understand is that data collection is at the forefront now of everything that happens in the world. And it's very, very useful where we come to assess a client. Data collection can give us a lot of data on what the client's actually saying, sometimes what the client says, and what a assessment tool does, maybe two slightly different things. So it gives us a good picture of what the client is presenting with, so we can tailor our service to them. And I want to tell you a story that I read in a national UK newspaper about someone who engaged with AI, and it was a journalist, and he was writing about he was pretending to be a client, and he was saying that he was feeling down and a bit depressed, and things weren't going well. And the AI was kind of responding in, as you say, Ken, this sycophantic way. And then he just changed the tempo a bit and said, oh, by the way, I live in, say, New York. Can you tell me where the highest buildings in New York is, or the very high bridges? And the AI said, sure, no problem. That's a great question, and started then to list very high buildings. Now, if you've been a therapist and someone had come to you and say, oh, I'm feeling a bit down, and, life's not really great, I'm not really want to go on very much. Oh, by the way, can you tell me where the highest bridge is? A therapist would be saying, should we talk about that? On one hand, he'd talk about not feeling very good, feeling down, not wanting to go on. Now he's talking about high bridges. They would do, a good therapist, or any therapist, to do an assessment on that. The AI went and just listed all the high buildings and bridges within a 5-mile radius of where the client was living. And at one point, there must have been a programming routine within the AI. And the AI actually said, wait, what? High buildings? And then another script came onto the screen and said, you might need to really contact your doctor or a professional. It seems like you might be having intrusive thoughts. And that's what I'm talking about. AI are so, a bit like sugar AI, probably not very good for you, but it's actually quite nice when you engage with it, and it's not always good for you. And as you rightly say, it's not therapy, Ken. There's no challenge or insight or real empathy. It is effectively an enhanced customer service bot, really, that tells you how great you are.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So it keys into one of the main points here, and that is that AI platforms don't provide any safeguarding. They don't hold any duty of care. And they don't always recognize risk or crisis situations. And if you think about it, as a therapist, you work to an ethical code. That's your kind of the programming that maybe is not seen by the client. I mean, you're going to mention it in your contract, but you're hardly going to, every time the client says something, say, oh, you know what, this actually falls into the category of XYZ in my ethical framework here, because it becomes invisible. It's almost like the software behind the therapy session, but it is always there. And that ethical code is there to protect the client, is there to protect you and the name of counselling and therapy in general. And it's been worked out and changed over many years to match updates in technology and to match updates in the latest data from research to serve. If you think about what the actual code is that runs underneath an AI model, it is very general in nature, and it is not there as a mental health tool, and it is usually the AI models are work in such a way to keep you engaged in them, so it keeps your eyeballs on them in the same way as social media. Social media, they introduce the unlimited scroll where it just goes on and on and on. You don't even have to say next page. Why? Because it keeps people on full longer. The same is true of AI models. Specifically now, as we speak about this, the companies that are building these models are reliant on external investment, and to get that external investment, they show how long and how engaged people are on that platform. And they just go on ChatGPT as an example, but of course you can try any of the others and ask it to do something, and at the end of what it's done, the task that it outputs, it'll then say, would you like me to make a slideshow of this? Would you like me to do X, Y, and Z? And it's trying to engage you and keep you involved there. So therefore, the underlying, I guess, software is trying to keep it's not therapeutic. It is in service of the company that builds it, not the person who is using it. And then the information shared, we work with confidentiality within counseling psychotherapy. We outline what that is. We outline where that confidentiality might end and where we would need to break confidentiality. And we make that clear and upfront with our client right at the beginning of our first session, before we even say, so what is it that you wish to bring? Well, any information shared with AI tools may be stored, it may be analyzed, it may be used by the provider or the model builder in ways that are completely outside of any therapeutic confidentiality. Anything placed into one of those models is not private. It may look private, it may feel private, but here again, if you go and look at news articles where AI has gone wrong, you will notice that in court cases, the very chat logs are there. They say, you said this to AI, then AI said this, and then you said this, and then AI said this. Even if the person deletes their app of that, it is stored and it is retrievable. Now, imagine clients sharing their deepest, most intimate parts of themselves, and that is being stored, analyzed, and perhaps a profile of that person is being made. And we don't know how this may go forward. I know that ChatGPT, as of today, is trialing putting adverts in their free version of ChatGPT. So you can go and you can use it. It's free of charge, but they're looking now at how they might deliver advertising. Why? Because they need to monetize that, because it isn't free for them. So they need to kind of win their money back. And just think about the algorithms of advertising. They are targeting you for what they think you can buy. They're trying to extract money from you, not make you feel better. And if you use social media, you may see how intrusive those adverts can be, and also how smart those adverts can be when delivered by an algorithm. It's kind of, oh, wow, that's interesting. That's just what I was thinking about the other day. There it is. And there's an advert for it right over there. So that is where your data is being taken, manipulated, sold to other companies, and then reflected back to you in adverts that try to get you to have a response on those. So there's just a handful of the pitfalls, the dangers that are maybe not seen unless we do the CPD to understand it. But most importantly, we need to give this information to our clients as well. And the best way to do that is to have a document, your contract, and to put it into your contract, Rory.
Absolutely. And if you need any kind of guidance on that, or just a little bit of information, I've made what Ken refers to as a super duper handout. So if you go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, find episode 367, that handout is there waiting for you. And you could have a look at it, and maybe that might inform your actions going forward. But I think my final thoughts on AI, they're not in service. It's not in service, generally speaking, of people's mental health or their well-being. It's in service of company profits and gaining advertisers. It's a commercial concern. And I'll just share this very stark story about the dangers of AI and social media in general. They had an investigation regarding social media, and they discovered, I think it was Facebook or one of the social media sites, when a young girl, maybe someone of school age, deleted a picture from their picture library, what would happen is that the AI built in to the algorithm, as it's sometimes called, would offer up advertising on makeup or beauty products. And it perpetuated the idea that, well, you're not good enough, but we can make you look better by buying our products. And I think that's the way AI is going to go. I can see a time where somebody will say, I think I might want to take my life, and I have some medication that I put aside, and I might want to take my life. And then AI offers up 15 pharmacies within 3-mile radius of where the client lives. And I think that's a very real possibility. So we need to be alert about it. We need to put it in our contracts. And please, I know a lot of people are saying, AI, what's it got to do with counselling? Everything has to do with counselling. Those extra therapeutic factors we talk about, what's going on outside in the client's life, outside the therapy room. So please do at least some CPD on, what are kind of ethical and helpful applications used in the NHS. That might be a good starting point. And just be aware, because this is a conversation that's happening now in practice rooms up and down the country, and indeed across the world.
Yes, indeed, Rory. It's a special interest of mine. I've been deep diving in this since 2023. I continue to do so. I'm the ethical AI lead in Counselling Tutor. Rory and I convened the AI ERG, which is the use of artificial intelligence in counselling and psychotherapy expert reference group, which is around that table sits our ethical bodies, some education providers, where we're talking about this at the top levels, at what that may look like as it rolls out. But you as the therapist, there is a duty. We need to learn about this. We cannot block our eyes, block our ears, not talk about it. We need to be having the conversation. Doesn't mean you got to use it. Doesn't mean you agree with AI. And I get all the arguments of the water that it uses, the power that it uses. I get all of that, but we still have to be curious enough to look at what may be coming into our therapy rooms, to understand it to the point where so many people say, "Oh, I don't use AI." Do a little bit of AI CPD and go, wow, I didn't know that there was AI in Grammarly. I didn't know that when I was using my banking app that there's actually AI software running in the background. AI is all around us, and it's built into so much of what we use. If you've got Alexa or a smart speaker, AI is at work within that room all the time, and it is becoming more and more prevalent. As we go out of this, I just wanted to share just a bit of wording. I said that I would around a contract. I'm not suggesting you take this. This is just an idea. But here's an idea of it. I'm going to read it out. Some clients choose to use artificial intelligence, AI-based applications, platforms, or chat tools that present themselves as offering emotional support, well-being guidance, or therapy-like conversations. These tools are separate from and not part of the counselling or psychotherapy service I provide. AI-based tools do not operate as a healthcare professional, nor do they have an understanding of you as an individual over time. They do not assess your personal history, previous experience, patterns of distress, or how your needs may change. While they may appear responsive and reassuring, they do not use ethical judgment, professional accountability, or ethical decision making. And then it goes into outlining a number of the challenges that a client may face, such as having their data collected, such as AI responses that may not be truthful, that sound confident and authoritative but are not. And then right at the end, you want to be putting that if you choose to use AI for personal support, you're encouraged to discuss this within therapy so that we can reflect on how this may be affecting you and the therapeutic process. That invites them to bring that in so that you can revisit this this contract that you're putting in there. And I'm going to leave you with this. Put it in your notes. The client comes in, says, I used AI and it said X, Y, and Z. Make sure you write it in your notes that you have spoken to them, that you have given where the dangers may sit, and that they brought that in and what you said to them, so that if you ever do find yourself in front of a panel, that you will have that defendable decision-making of what you did as duty of care to that client. We can't just have a chat with them about what they find, or a show our curiosity and go, oh, well, there you go. And it's not about us. It's not about the client getting information from an AI model and then coming in and speaking to us and us going, well, I don't feel that you're attacking me here and my therapy. I feel okay. It's not about us. It's about them and our duty of care. It's about their data. It's about their well-being. And we now have a duty. If you've listened to this, you have a duty to think about this and work out how you're going to put it into your practice. In Counselling Tutor, we're busy putting together some ethical AI training. Watch out, it's coming in February. I've mentioned that before, where we're going to be holding some webinars that you will be able to attend, where we're going to be covering these kind of topics. If you are a supervisor, you really need to be delving into this when your supervisee comes in and brings this topic up, so that you can work with them in an informed way which serves them, their practice, and their clients. So much to learn, Rory.
Yes, and it's gonna be a integral part of our society now.
Yeah.
You know, we cannot turn back on this, and it's going to become more embedded in people's lives. It's going to be, just as people discuss social media or what they're seeing on the TV or on the computer screen, AI is going to be part of our society, whether we like it or not. So we need to get clued up in the service of our clients.
And what's interesting is, we're speaking about LLMs here and off-the-shelf models. There are plenty of models that are under review at the moment where there is clinical thinking behind it, and they are going to be some incredible tools that may work in the background to help us in our therapy. They're not going to sit in between you and the client. They're going to basically sit behind and do some of the heavy lifting of tasks that frees us up to be with our clients. If you're interested in this topic, if you're in an organization and you're speaking about this topic and you're looking for anybody to speak about it, please do get in contact with us. I'm Ken at counsellingtutor.com. We're doing a number of talks around the country at various events on this topic because it is important and we need to get this information out. And don't forget to go to get the super duper handout on this where the points we've covered today are there and some thinking prompts for you for your own practice. And you get that by going to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 367, and you can download it from within that page. And that is today's ethical, sustainable practice. And as we step out of that heavy topic, Rory, we step into practice matters and that interview that you had with Andrew Kidd.
Yeah, I caught up with Andrew Kidd, who's been on the podcast before, to discuss EMDR, eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing therapy. In our first episode, we met him, talked about the structural model, and now he comes to part two, where he discusses the functional model, how it's applied, and how the client would engage with the model of therapy. I caught up with Andrew, and this is what he shared.
Practice Matters is proudly sponsored by the Counsellor CPD Library. To access top quality, relevant continuing professional development for your practice that you can do at a time that suits you and all for less than the price of a cup of coffee, visit counsellingtutor.com.
Today, I'm delighted to welcome back Andrew Kidd for the second part of our interview, where we'll explore the functional model of EMDR. So let's get straight into it. So Andrew, when we met last time in episode 356, I think it was, we talked about the kind of structural model of EMDR. But what about the functional model? This is what we're going to talk about today. So when we talk about the functional model, it's really how it works. We talked about the theory, but how does it work? So how does EMDR understand trauma?
So I think sometimes when people think about trauma, they start asking themselves, what's went wrong? What's went wrong when someone has been traumatized? EMDR helps us understand what's went right. And by that, I mean, the first thing to understand when I'm talking about psychological trauma is I'm not talking about an event. The trauma isn't what happens to you. The trauma is what happens inside you as a consequence of what happens to you. So the word trauma, it comes from a Greek word that means to wound. So we understand trauma as the internal wound. So from an EMDR perspective, trauma isn't a sign of pathology. And when I say that, I just mean trauma isn't a sign that something's wrong with you. But when someone's been traumatized, it's a sign that the nervous system is doing exactly what it's been designed to do, and that's prioritize your survival. So your nervous system is at the heart of every moment you experience in life. So we'll try the experiment like we did last time. So Rory, could you bring to mind an image of your favourite food?
Yes. Yeah, I've done that. Yes.
When thinking of that image and when seeing it in your mind's eye, what do you notice in your body? Do you feel any sensations or?
Well, yeah, there's a bit of Pavlovian response going on, I have to say. My gastric juices are starting to flow, and there's a kind of excited feeling in my tummy, knowing that I'm going to ingest my chicken Rogan Josh at any moment. And I dare say that as we record this at 10 o'clock in the morning, there'll be a bit of a letdown feeling when I realise that I won't be eating that until tonight.
I'm sure the viewers and myself will also share the apologies for the trauma that I'm causing you right now. No, but more importantly, notice that you didn't say your brain, right? You didn't say your brain. And that's the learning. Your experience is dictated by your nervous system. And even if we imagine something, it feels real to the nervous system. You didn't tell your brain to automatically respond in that way. It just did. And when someone's experiencing a trauma, they're not telling their nervous system to respond in a particular way. It just doesn't. So maybe something happens and someone becomes emotionally overwhelmed. Maybe they shut down, maybe they become argumentative, maybe they go into fight, flight, freeze or fawn mode. So it's important to understand that the brain and the body, they're part of one nervous system. And the memory is a function of the nervous system. And also, we don't just think about memories, we feel them as well. So when we're bringing this together, trauma isn't just stored cognitively, but it's stored within the body, within the nervous system. And normally memories are processed and integrated within the hippocampus. It's like a librarian filing experiences appropriately. And when experiencing a trauma, the brain can't do its job properly and store memories as it normally would. So EMDR suggests that when a disturbing event occurs, it can get stuck in the brain with the original thoughts, pictures, sounds, feelings, and sensations. And EMDR is looking to stimulate that information to allow the brain to reprocess the experience. So the eye movements help reprocess the memory and other associated experiences. And when EMDR is processing trauma, it's engaging your brain's natural healing mechanisms. It's your own brain that's doing the healing, and you're the one in control. So like I said, it's less about what's went wrong for the person. The idea is that trauma becomes a problem when old survival strategies get stuck in the system and your nervous system starts reacting to the past as if it's happening right now. And EMDR allows these memories to reprocess so the past no longer hijacks the present.
Ah, right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And if we were to continue the metaphor of the hippocampus being a filing cabinet, would I be right in thinking that in a very stressful situation, the memories are not all filed in order? They can be literally just full of memories. And part of EMDR may be for that part of the brain to kind of structure the memories. Would I be right in my assumption there?
Yeah. So one of the most common symptoms associated with traumatic memories is the hippocampus, it doesn't add time to an experience. And because it doesn't add time to it, that's why memories can feel a little bit patchy, a little bit disorganized, a little bit hard to recall. They're not coherent, they're not flowing. So, yeah. Yeah.
And we talked about the work of the eye movement, but eye movements or tapping tones, it seems very simple, doesn't it? But it's actually very powerful. What is actually happening in the brain? I know we talk about the whole nervous system, and maybe you say it's the whole nervous system reacts. What's actually happening when we use that kind of bilateral stimulation, which would be the eye movements? What's going on for the body and the brain there?
Yeah, so for listeners, if you're familiar with EMDR, you might have seen the image or the video of like a therapist wagging their finger and the client following it with their eyes. And it's definitely a bit odd when people first see it. They're confused. They don't understand what's happening. So it's a really good question really to cover in this podcast as well. So the eye movements and taps and tones, they are part of a technique called bilateral stimulation. In plain English, bilateral stimulation helps bring up the memories and sensations that are connected to the disturbance, and they keep the brain busy enough just so that it's easier to handle. And it keeps the thinking part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, engaged in the present so that your brain stays calm and focused and helps you process a past memory safely without becoming overwhelmed. So to dive a little bit deeper into the psychology, it's called bilateral stimulation because it's doing something to activate the both left and right hemispheres of the brain. When you're doing eye movements, your brain will be holding and juggling information in the present. So as you're listening to this fantastic podcast with two very handsome, intelligent guys, you're using your working memory right now. Your brain is keeping you focused in the here and now. Maybe you smiled, maybe you laughed, maybe you rolled your eyes at my incredible humour, right? That's your working memory. That's what's at work here. The working memory can only handle so much information before it becomes overwhelmed. Like imagine your computer or your phone, if it's running too much apps, it starts to slow down, it becomes harder for it to work. And when we're doing bilateral stimulation, we want to create a similar effect with EMDR to occupy the mind, to slow it down and to help us access the memory without becoming overwhelmed. And that's where the eye movements come in. So, or the taps or the tones. The bilateral stimulation is a dual attention task that splits your attention between the past and the present. And this gives your brain a chance to reprocess an experience safely to reduce its emotional intensity without getting overwhelmed as you might when you've been triggered. So bilateral stimulation is all about engaging your brain's natural healing mechanism.
That's fascinating. So effectively, I think any therapist would recognise someone who's regressing into the experience that happened in the past. They're no longer in the here and now; they're in the there and then. So, what I'm hearing you say is that the technique is to anchor the client in the here and now, while they're processing the there and then memories, the historic memories, and it kind of keeps the brain occupied. That's absolutely fascinating. And as a therapist, how do you assess if the clients may become overwhelmed when using this technique? Is there anything that you could tell within the model that a client may be overwhelmed, even though they're using the technique?
Yeah, I think this is where your preparation comes in. So the first two phases of EMDR therapy are called history taking and preparation. And during these two phases, you're building safety and trust in a therapeutic alliance, therapeutic relationship with the client. You're ensuring that the client can self-regulate even a little bit. You're helping them build up confidence, maybe by using grounding exercises, like you said, as an anchor before getting into processing work. It's essentially stabilization work before you do any processing. Clients can sometimes be pretty nervous when they come for an EMDR session just because they're unsure of the process. So the therapist has to clearly explain what will be happening, how we'll do it, and they do that in a very collaborative way. It's not a case of a client coming in and before they've even took their jacket off, they're doing eye movements and flung it. So you're introducing the tools to a client that will help them ground and stabilize themselves. And it's important to say that during the eye movements and processing, the client is always in control. It's their own brain that's doing the healing. We discuss safety with clients, and maybe before even beginning the eye movements, you might say to a client, you can say stop or raise your hand at any point if you'd like to, if it feels too much. The therapy has to be set at the client's pace. And as always with therapists, we need to gently encourage people when they hit a challenging moment. We don't want to feed into avoidance, but we want to have that trust between ourselves and the client to make sure they feel safe enough to engage. And with that, for clients, it's really important to ensure they're working with a practitioner who's had accredited EMDR training, not someone who just misunderstands the therapy, thinking it's just eye movements and just a tool and just a quick technique. It's important you're with a therapist who knows what they're doing. Yeah.
Yes, and so I think that anybody listening to this podcast who fancies having a go of what Andrew's discussed, that probably isn't a good idea. Well, it isn't a good idea. I'll be very directive there. And as we talked about in the previous interview, you have to go for training for this. Andrew's very kindly giving us an overview, pulling the curtain back, if you like, on the training. I think one of the interesting things that strikes me is that I think a lot of people think, and I had a conversation the other day with somebody, not a therapist, who were very worried he'd have to tell the therapist in detail everything that happened to me. Now, that isn't always the case in the therapy I practiced, but that's not the case in EDMR, is it? They don't have to tell you everything in detail.
No, so the reason for that is because simply telling a story doesn't mean you're processing it. I'm sure, Rory, you've worked with clients who, even as they're speaking about a story, maybe it's something they've told themselves or other people many, many times. Maybe they're zoned out, maybe they're avoiding painful parts. And sometimes talking can be a form of avoidance as well, right? Getting in the way of action. So EMDR is kind of like physiotherapy for the brain. We're looking to exercise a memory network so your brain can process and heal. And like I said, we're using bilateral stimulation. And the idea is that these memories drive symptoms. And if we understand how a memory is stored, then we can understand why you feel and react the way you do. So EMDR is all about tapping into how a memory is stored, how it's affecting you, without having to relive every painful detail. So we don't need the full story to access that memory network. EMDR is looking to work directly with the memory, and which allows us to process it without overwhelming the nervous system. So the therapist needs to activate, stimulate, and move the memory, and we don't need the full story to activate it. The headline is enough, right? And like I said, for processing to take place, the therapist just needs to activate the memory, and this can be done in different ways. And this can actually appeal to particular clients who maybe would experience a lot of shame around an event. Maybe they don't want to disclose details. Maybe they have spoke about an event for years and years. It's a different way of working. So the focus is all about activating the memory, how it feels now, not how it felt back then, because back then is the story, the there and then, like you said, focusing on the here and now. And that helps keep it safe, manageable and effective, and letting the brain do its natural healing work.
Yeah, and I think that links in, I'm listening very carefully to what he's saying, I think that links in to the fact that part of that work, that bilateral stimulation, is anchoring the client in the here and now. So they're in the here and now, and then they process the there and then.
That's it. Yeah.
The there and then memory, and then they then reflect on what it feels like in the here and now. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah. It's just, sometimes when you ask clients questions to recall, they'll look at you because it's like, well, how do you feel now as you look back on what happened then?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, it's all about the here and now, the now experience, what's going on now, because we know the memory isn't a reliable narrator. We know that when you remember something, you're not remembering the actual time of the event, you're remembering the last time you remembered it, right? So there is something about what's going on for you right now as you're connecting this memory network, and that's the sauce, that's the gravy, that's what we want to work with, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the big takeaway for a lot of people who study trauma, is that, that the part of the brain that stores the memory doesn't have a clock. It's not like a videotape that has a time code on it. You're absolutely right. When they recall it from the last time they've accessed it, which is I think is a fascinating insight into just how our memories work. When we think about EMDR, we obviously think about trauma, but does it fit with attachment at all, where people might have had traumatic attachments?
It can do. I think lots of clients will carry attachment issues, old relational wounds that shape how they see themselves, other people in the world. And sadly, until a person understands what's happened to them, they'll blame themselves. Often they'll blame themselves even though they've experienced horrible, horrible things in relationships. And for me as a practitioner, I strongly believe relationships heal relationships. And we've spoke a lot about bilateral stimulation, but no tool, technique, mechanism, modality, I don't think anything is more powerful than the therapeutic relationship between a therapist and a client. So when you are working with attachment, you still focus on the memories, but you may focus on, for instance, the presenting trauma. So the big trauma events or the crisis that clients are aware of in here and now. A massive part of working with attachment is the absence of repair. The subtle attachment experiences that weren't soothed or processed or supported in the past. And quite a lot of times the absence of repair is often the reason old attachment patterns causes issues. Sometimes you might work with an internalized caregiver, so maybe like how a parent or a caregiver stress or coping patterns have become internalized and shape how a client is experiencing relationships today. Other times you can work with collective or intergenerational experiences. We're talking about culture and family and historical trauma that influences someone's identity and how they relate to the world. So when working with attachment and EMDR, it's not about erasing memories, but it is about rewiring how they're stored. It is about helping clients experience themselves, the relationships, and the world in a more safe, regulated, and connect way, and helping them find safety in relationships.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I guess that, like with attachment, the therapeutic relationship itself is an arbiter sometimes for people to be able to recover from that, to have someone, the good enough other, as or mother, as Winnicott said, but the good enough other as people who practice these kind of Donald Winnicott's ideas. What does change feel like for the client? So how do clients describe the difference once the memory's been reprocessed?
I think different people respond in different ways, but usually when they describe a memory, they describe feeling more distant from the experience. Like they can still think of it, they can still recall it, they can still have a relationship with it, but there feels like there's more distance. And usually one of the more common descriptions is the word weird. And if you're an EMDR practitioner and someone says it feels weird in a good way, not in a bad way, you know you're onto something, because it changes, it shifts, like I said, activate, stimulate and move. It's like, I've got a different relationship, it feels distant. And a metaphor we use, it's like as if you can see like scenery passing by on a train. So you can still see it in the distance, but it's not as present, it's not as close as it was before.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I guess as a therapist, using this technique, it isn't magic, there is a science behind it, but it must be incredibly reassuring, if that's the word, for a client to say that they come in racked with traumatic memories, and when they leave you, they are literally, they've lost their sting, they're not as intense. That must be an amazing feeling for a therapist, I would imagine.
It's really, it's really, really rewarding. But as always, the focus has to be on the client rather than our own egos.
Yes, of course. So
there is part of you that's, you're feeling, it's all about alleviating pain. It's all about helping the person. It's all about, and when you hear someone who's came to you with a problem, maybe they've had it for years, maybe you've had a client who said, I've never spoken about this, or I've never been able to work through this, and you can see the relief, not just in their face, but in their body as well. And when you see that and when you hear that, sometimes I don't believe them. I'm like, really? Like, you really? It's just, it's still shocking to me sometimes. It's incredible. But I think, it's just an amazing feeling to know that EMDR is one of many therapies that can alleviate pain and help people in their lives.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's absolutely amazing. And it's been a real eye-opener to hear the two podcasts that you've made. So it just goes for me to say, Andrew Kidd, thank you so much for joining us.
Big thank you to Andrew Kidd. Big thank you to you, Rory, for holding those all-important discussions. And that was today's Practice Matters. Now on to student services, where we recognise you, students, on your formal journey to gain counselling skills, maybe become a counsellor or a psychotherapist. And a question: when do you actually become qualified? This is an interesting one, Roy, and it's asked a lot. A lot of confusion about this.
It is a huge amount of confusion. And one of those confusing threads that appeared in our Facebook group, someone asking the very same question. And if you want to join our Facebook group, if you just go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, click on, come and join us, and you'll find a lot of interesting conversations. And the kind of thrust of this was that someone had been doing a level 4 qualification. That's an English and Wales level 4. Now, I think before we start on this journey, the UK is made up of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, and they all have their own, to some extent, their own educational level. Scotland is quite different, but generally speaking, I'm going to use the word diploma in counselling because it covers all those regions, even though they may be at different levels. So in England, it's a level 4. If you go to Scotland, a diploma may be considered level 8 or 9. It sits in the middle. And, each region has its own view. But if you've completed a diploma in counselling, that allows you to join a professional body such as the BACP or the NCPS or the UKCP in some cases, if your qualification has been in the room where you've actually gone to a building and sat with other people and undertaken the qualification, and if your qualification is run by an awarding body such as CPCAB, there are other awarding bodies are available, and if part of that qualification is you've had a minimum of 100 hours of practice with a client that's been supervised by an external supervisor, usually in an agency. Then when you come to the end of that course and you graduate, you are technically a qualified counsellor. Now, this is one of these very interesting conversations where you could have two ideas and both would be right. So we come on now to what is qualified. And I think that's the issue. And we don't have regulation in this country. As of recording this podcast, we're not regulated. So counselling isn't a protected title. Counsellor isn't a protected title. We rely on what we call voluntary regulation, which is undertaken by something called the Professional Standards Authority. And the Professional Standards Authority oversee the professional bodies that people join. So think of it as an umbrella. Right at the top is the Professional Standards Authority, and underneath her, I think there's 8 professional bodies, and of those I've just mentioned, and you can join them. Now, the question that came up was that this person believed they were qualified, and apparently somebody said that you're not qualified until you've done another course, which gives you what's called a level 5 qualification, which is a post-graduation qualification. And that was where the debate was. So here's the thing. If you graduate one sunny August when your certificate falls through the door, your diploma falls through the door, you are, by all accounts, a qualified counsellor. You can then go on to join an ethical body, a professional body. You can go onto a listing, a directory listing, and advertise your services as a professional therapist. And those listings will ask for your insurance, and they'll ask for your qualification, and they'll list you, and you can set your own website up. To all intents and purposes, you're qualified. But there's a difference between qualified and being employable. And this is where I think this confusion about qualifications come in. So if you want to work for, say, the National Health Service, or say an EAP, an Employment Assistance Programme, more and more these organisations are asking that you're accredited. What accredited means is that you do a separate piece of work and submit it to your professional body, and they mark the work. It's like an entrance exam. And then what happens is that they accredit you, and you become accredited. And you can only become accredited after, I think, you've done about 450 hours in practice. And once you become accredited, then that opens the door nowadays to be able to get work in National Health Service or EAPs. Now, to do that, you need to put in the accreditation assignment, and I'm just going to call it an assignment. You've got to hit the criteria, and part of hitting that criteria is things that probably you're not taught in your initial training. You'd have to do another piece of training. And what I'm talking about here is things like using assessment tools like Core 10 or PHQ-9. You might have to talk about relationship ruptures and how to repair ruptures. So the way that the profession is moving is there's going to be a kind of two-tier profession. There's qualified people who can work where they want as long as they're not working. They probably won't get work with EAPs and health service or big organisations who are looking for accreditation. So the second part of training kind of fills that gap. Now, I'm not saying it's fair. I'm not saying it's equitable. I'm just telling you how the world works. And this is driven by something called ScopeEd, which is the scope of education. It's an initiative that's been driven by professional bodies, and it puts therapists in columns. So when you graduate, you're in column A. When you do the accreditation, you're in column B. Column C is a specific training route, and maybe we'll come to that in another podcast. So the answer to the question, long-winded kind of response, is that when you get your qualification, whether it be a degree or whether it be your diploma, and you've gone through those hurdles that I discussed earlier on, you are a qualified counsellor. However, the world of work opens up and is beginning to become more restricted if you're not accredited. And I hope that answers that question. It's complicated, isn't it, Ken?
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com. It's interesting. Something plays out in me because very often the post or the comments around this topic are, look at it and it's not fair. I didn't know this. Nobody told me. Now I've gone and I've spent all of this time and all of this money and I've trained. And now every time I look at jobs, they want so much experience and they need me to be accredited or at least working towards accreditation. And there's almost a feeling that this is an unfair cloud that sits over counselling and psychotherapy. However, it is not. This is very common indeed. And I'm going to give you an example here. My daughter has just recently graduated. She's did a degree in ecology. She got her master's in that, and she now has a master's degree in ecology. Well, she can't go and become an ecologist. She can't be. So she's now gone into a company where she has to now work towards gaining further qualifications, CPD, certain licenses that you would need. And she's on a career path. In other words, her degree was the foundation. Her master's was the foundation. And onto that, she builds her career. Just turns out that around 80% of those on her course find themselves in exactly the same situation. They're working in restaurants, they're working in clothes shops, rather than because they're looking out and they're seeing exactly the same thing. And that's in ecology. I have connection with somebody who's just finished a law degree. He's not a lawyer. And he even had to work hard to become a paralegal, and then he has to be a paralegal for an amount of years before he can even undertake the training and the kind of the supervised journey to get his license to practice law. So it is very common that you will go and you will do really formal training, and it will give you a foundation to stand on to start the process. Now, where I think that it differs with counselling and psychotherapy is so often we enter training maybe a little bit later in life. You know, we've gone ahead, we've lived some life, and something has called us into counselling and psychotherapy. We go back, we train. So we may be a little further down the line when we realize, hold on a minute, this is just the foundation for me to stand on here. Now I've got to do CPD, I've got to get 450 hours before accreditation, supervised hours, then I've got to do some work and put it in with my ethical body just to be able to get certain jobs. And I think that is maybe unseen when many go into training. So for my daughter and for the chap that I was speaking about, they're in their 20s. So they're looking at this and going, well, you know, that's the way it is. And that's how it goes. But I don't know that information is always made clear at the beginning of training, Rory. But it is very, very common that you will find people with law degrees working in a mobile phone shop telling you which contract you should buy. You know, It doesn't necessarily mean you graduate and the doors fly open for you. Now, something else on this is if you look and continue knocking and you really, really want this, you will find a route. You will find a route. From my graduation year, those that really wanted it have gone on and they have just faced what they needed to face, and they are still in practice today, running really good, successful practices at various levels, some of them much higher levels than me, I might say. But that's just because they really wanted it. Others kind of fell by the wayside. They took those skills and maybe never went to, maybe they had an intention to practice, but they weren't able or willing to face that resistance that does stand post-graduation. Don't know if that gives you any thoughts to carry on there with, Rory.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think you've hit on really the nub of the issue is that it's about transparency, and I do see colleges, universities, advertising courses, and then what they do is they give her how much you can earn on graduation, and as a way of kind of as a marketing exercise. And I think having a more transparent journey, showing people what they need to do really to gain and sustain work in the profession would be very helpful, because I think a lot of people think, well, I've got my qualification, I'm qualified, and that was the frustration in the Facebook discussion. I'm qualified now. I've got to shell out more money to jump through this hoop to do this, and I think it is a frustration. But you're absolutely right. My daughter has 3 degrees, and she has a master's degree in education. And when she taught, she had to jump through the QTLS hoop. She got quality teaching and learning badge, and that made her, certainly in the school sector, more employable. That was considered the entry qualification. Now, cynical people may say the reason this has happened is because qualifications aren't as rigorous as they used to be, and that professions are doing their own kind of doorkeeping on this. Yes, great, you've got a qualification. Let's just see how much you know, and we will do our own examinations. And then once you've passed those, we'll be really happy that you know how to work in the profession. You've talked about the legal profession, Ken. When you did a law degree in the past, I think you did article clerk, and then you went on to be a lawyer. Now you've got to do a bar examination, I believe. So, and a number of other things. So it's not unusual, but I do feel for people. I really, really do. And I just politely ask that those people who advertise courses maybe do some kind of handout that kind of illustrates where the profession is and what that route is to work. Because I think there's a lot of people who come to the end of their qualification maybe a bit disillusioned. They say, I've worked so hard, I've spent so much money, and now I've got to work for 450 hours for free before I can even apply for accreditation. I think that needs to be really, really clear, but that's the world we're in, and we're not going to change that anytime soon. And I hope that kind of makes things clear. The other thing I'd say, it's probably likely to change as well. The profession is moving and morphing and growing. So, what we say today on the podcast, in a few months may have changed somewhat, but that's where we are today, Ken.
It is, yeah, and it's not necessary that you graduate and then have to go and work for free for the remainder of those hours, but you may find yourself not earning what you'd hoped. And that's other threads that we see. And just to put that into perspective, my daughter's her university journey to masters, it comes in at around £60,000. That's a lot of money. And all it does is give her a foundation for an entry-level job where pretty much she's earning around about minimum wage at the moment. And that may be looked at and said, that's unfair. But I guess it's showing that it's not just in counselling and psychotherapy. And I come back to, if you really want it, you will make it happen. And one of the avenues is going into private practice. But here again, there's missing information, learning how to run a business, how to set up a business, what that looks like, all the processes and procedures around that. And that takes learning, which is more expense. And it's, I guess, in life these days, specifically here in the UK, we're investing a lot into education, growing ourselves, and it can be challenging. But the right people, I believe, make it through, Rory.
I agree, Ken. We've taught students, and some of them have gone on to have stellar careers. I've got someone I'm still in contact with, and they're now in a job that I couldn't apply for, not qualified enough.
Yeah, exactly.
They are really enjoying it, and and the thing is, you don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to sort of just, leave your first training and then just go straight into your second. Usually, first trainings are very intense, very long duration. In my experience, as you go into a post graduation, the training is usually shorter, and you can usually go at it at your own pace. Master's degrees are different because they work in academic years, but you can choose your training, and I guess that it's about service to the public, isn't it? If you've got a loved one going to see a therapist, then having the best informed therapist they can see is what you want. I think there's something about societal expectations as well. So just keep going. If you're out there and you're training, just keep hungry for it. You will get there. There is work. There is well paid work, but you have to be in it for the long haul.
Yeah. Resilience is maybe the word of the day, and persistence. Resilience and persistence. And on that note, this has been episode 367 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with ethical and sustainable practice, talking to clients about AI, risks, ethics, and good practice. We talked about having a good idea to put AI into your contract, and there is a great handout. You go to counsellingtutor.com, look for the podcast tab, episode 367, and that handout's available for you there. May be able to help you shape your contract to add in AI. In Practice Matters, we caught up with the second of a two-part interview with Andrew Kidd, who talked about EMDR, eye movements and desensitized reprocessing therapy. And he's talked about the functional model of it, how it's applied and how it works. Fascinating conversation. And he's also offered to do a lecture for the CPD library on this very subject. So, keep watching for that. And in student services, we talked about when does a counsellor become qualified. Ken and myself shot the breeze about the different routes to becoming qualified and I guess making a living out of counselling. As we come to the end, I'd like to thank you for your likes, shares and subscribes. And as always, and until the next time, stay grounded and stay safe.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode by visiting counsellingtutor.com.